In the area where the Fitzgerald went down, a sister ship joined the search. So far, all that was found was an oil slick, life jacket, and an empty lifeboat. There was no sign of the 29 men aboard.
Lake Superior is unforgiving, and on a cold November night in 1975, it swallowed an entire ship whole. But unlike the Titanic, whose wreck is greatly documented, no one really knows what happened to the Fitzgerald.
Finding the first clue as to the whereabouts of the Fitzgerald's crew was a mixed emotion. There was sorrow, but also a sense of achievement. After all, no trace of the 29 men has been seen in 20 years.
Did the ship sink thanks to bad weather? Was there a hole in the hatch? Or was it foul play? For decades, the answers to these questions remained elusive. But with a new cutting-edge drone technology capable of traveling more than 500 feet below, the mystery of the Fitzgerald has finally come to an end. What is the truth about the wreck, and why did it terrify the world? Let's get into it. The legend of the Edmund Fitzgerald. On the evening of November the 10th, 1975, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald suddenly vanished from radar. She was a massive ship, one of the largest to ever work the Great Lakes, 729 feet long, capable of carrying more than 26,000 tons of iron ore pellets. That fateful night, she carried a full load from Superior, Wisconsin, bound for Detroit. With a reputation built over 17 years of service, the Fitzgerald was known as a workhorse, fast and reliable. But no one was aware of the tragedy that awaited ahead. Many say Lake Superior is unforgiving, and that night it was. A storm developed with winds reported at nearly hurricane strength and waves climbing well over 25 feet. The Fitzgerald and another freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson, struggled through the gale. Radio transmissions that evening revealed a captain under strain, but not yet panicked. At 7:10 p.m., Captain Ernest McSorley would give his last transmission. "We are holding our own," he said. Within minutes, however, the Fitzgerald disappeared, never to be seen sailing again. 29 men were on board. Tragically, none survived. As expected, the ship's sudden loss shook the Great Lakes shipping community. What could have possibly happened? Was it just the waves? Or was there something else lurking deep in the waters? Searchers tried but found no survivors and, at first, no wreckage. Only lifeboats and debris surfaced. It was all completely unbelievable. From the scale of the disaster, the size of the vessel, the complete loss of crew, to the mystery of what had happened, the news soon gripped the entire North America. In 1976, the US Navy's CURV-3 remotely operated vehicle was sent to locate the wreck, but no one expected it would reveal that the Fitzgerald had broken in two. According to the footage, her bow stood upright in the mud, still recognizable as the proud freighter she had been. Her stern lay some distance away, overturned and twisted. Scattered debris, hatch covers, cargo, and wreckage littered the lake floor. It was pretty clear that this was no simple sinking. Something more catastrophic than a storm had torn the ship apart. For many, the emotional weight of the disaster was carried in song. Canadian folk singer Gordon Lightfoot released The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald in 1976. The ballad became a cultural memorial, recounting the night the ship went down and cementing its place in collective memory. The song's somber tone was enough to capture what words alone could not: the suddenness, the violence, and the human cost. Over the years, fascination with the wreck grew and expeditions returned, each one unveiling more detail than the last. Jacques Cousteau's team visited in 1980 and filmed the site. Later missions in the 80s and 90s provided clearer imagery and raised new questions about what had caused the disaster. Was it a structural failure, hatch cover collapse, shoaling on a reef, or even the sudden strike of a rogue wave? No single explanation gained universal acceptance. As the decades rolled by, the wreck itself became more than evidence. It became a memorial. In 1995, a dive recovered the Fitzgerald's bell, later placed in a museum, and replaced underwater with a replica engraved with the names of the 29 crew. From that point forward, the site was officially regarded as a gravesite, with calls for respect and restraint in future expeditions. Nearly half a century later, the Fitzgerald remains both a tragedy and a mystery. Each descent of a drone or submersible reveals something haunting. Not answers that close the case, but reminders of how fragile even the mightiest ships can be when set against the forces of the Great Lakes. The new mission and the team. Exploring the Edmund Fitzgerald is not an ordinary dive. At more than 500 feet below the surface, the wreck lies far beyond the reach of conventional scuba divers. And if you're terrified, in all honesty, you should be. The wreck is a place where light never penetrates, temperatures hover near freezing, and pressures are strong enough to crush unprotected equipment. In fact, it is so dangerous that any attempt to reach it requires technology built specifically for the task. Early surveys relied on the Navy's CURV-3, a remotely operated vehicle designed for deep-sea recovery. In the decades since, technology has advanced dramatically. Modern underwater drones, equipped with high-definition cameras, sonar mapping systems, and precise maneuvering thrusters, can record the wreck in ways unthinkable back in 1976. Where once grainy footage and still photographs offered only fragments, today's drones bring back crisp, three-dimensional imagery. They allow researchers to see not just the broad outlines of the ship, but the details of rivets, torn steel, and even personal effects resting on the lake bed. Yet these missions are not only technical exercises, they are carried out by teams of specialists who understand both the science and the responsibility of documenting a gravesite. Marine archaeologists, engineers, and historians join together to plan every descent. Before a drone even does as much as enter the water, the team must map its path, set clear objectives, and confirm compliance with regulations protecting the site. The Great Lakes Shipwreck. Historical Society, for example, has been involved in preserving the memory of lost vessels while also promoting careful, respectful exploration. But while the purpose of returning to the Fitzgerald might seem like an opportunity to chase sensational discoveries, it's actually to preserve history. Every pass of a drone adds to a digital record that ensures future generations can study the wreck without disturbing it. Detailed mapping can reveal how the ship has deteriorated over time, offering clues to both the violence of her sinking and the slow effects of decades underwater. Equally important are the ethical considerations. For the families of the 29 crewmen, the Fitzgerald is not simply a shipwreck, but a final resting place. Survey teams work with care, avoiding intrusion into crew quarters or removal of artifacts. In 1995, after the recovery of the ship's bell, Canadian and American authorities agreed that further salvage would be inappropriate. Since then, exploration has shifted toward non-invasive documentation. This way, each new mission to the Fitzgerald carries a dual weight: the technical challenge of deep water exploration and the solemn duty of honoring those who never returned. And the underwater drone becomes both a scientific tool and a witness, capturing images that remind us not only of how the ship was lost, but why it still matters. But what does it take to launch a drone into the depths of darkness? Descent and approach. Into the black. Launching an underwater drone into Lake Superior is the beginning of a journey into the abyss. From the surface, the water may appear calm, even reflective, but once the machine is lowered beyond a few dozen feet, light fades quickly. At 100 feet, outlines blur. At 200, visibility narrows to a dim blue-green haze. By the time the drone nears 500 feet, only its own floodlights carve through the water, revealing a world where day never reaches. Operators monitor the descent from the surface vessel. On their screens, the drone's cameras stream back shifting views, plumes of silt stirred by unseen currents, particles drifting like snow through the beams of light. the occasional flash of a fish startled by the intruder. The deeper the drone goes, the more silence seems to press in. Thankfully, unlike the ocean, Lake Superior has no tides. Still, its cold depths are even and heavy, giving the impression of entering a sealed chamber. The instruments record the passage downward. Sonar begins to pick up faint contours of the lake floor, sketching an outline before the cameras see anything. The pilot adjusts thrusters carefully, as any too sudden movement could stir up sediment and blind the cameras. The descent is slow, steady, almost ritualistic, and the closer the drone moves to the bottom, the stronger the anticipation becomes. Then, shapes begin to emerge. At first, they are indistinct shadows, rising from the mud. A long line comes into view, then an angle, then the unmistakable curve of steel plating. The bow of the Edmund Fitzgerald looms out of the darkness. Even after decades underwater, its sheer size commands awe. Standing upright, the bow towers from the lake bed, its structure dwarfing the drone that approaches it. The lights reveal details that are both familiar and unsettling. Anchor chains still in place, railings bent, hull plating scarred by the violence of the sinking. The drone circles slowly, maintaining a respectful distance. From this angle, the Fitzgerald does not look like a broken relic, but like a massive ship still holding its form, frozen in time. Yet the absence of movement, of crew, of life, turns the image into something mournful. The cameras catch glimpses of debris scattered across the bottom, twisted hatch covers, pieces of cargo, and fragments of equipment. Each object tells part of the story of that night, though sadly, none explains it fully. A short distance away, the stern lies in contrast, overturned and crumpled. It appears as though torn apart by invisible hands. The break between bow and stern testifies to the incredible forces that split the vessel. The scene is not dramatic in the sense of sudden motion, rather it is haunting in its stillness. The Fitzgerald rests as it has for nearly 50 years, silent and unchanged, surrounded only by cold water and silence. For those guiding the drone from above, the moment carries weight. The wreck is no longer a story in books or a song on the radio. It is a real presence, immense, fragile, and final. The broken hull and structural collapse. When the underwater drone's lights first swept across the Edmund Fitzgerald's hull, the scale of the disaster came into view. What had once been a proud freighter, 729 feet long, one of the largest on the Great Lakes, now lay broken and distorted on the lakebed. The ship was not resting intact, but split into two massive sections, separated by a field of twisted steel and scattered debris. This break is one of the enduring mysteries of the Fitzgerald. Ships of her class were designed to flex in heavy seas, but not to fail so catastrophically. As the drone traced the outline of the wreck, it recorded jagged tears where steel had ripped apart, exposing cross-sections of the ship that no one was ever meant to see. The forward section, containing the bow, sits upright, its keel buried deep into the clay of the lake floor. This suggests that it struck with tremendous force, bow first, driving downward as though speared into the earth. The stern, by contrast, is inverted and badly crumpled, a tangled mass of steel and machinery. Between them lies a wide gap littered with hatch covers, railings, and cargo. Just in case you're wondering what caused the hull to break, it still remains a subject of debate among engineers and historians. Some believe that rogue waves, possibly over 35 feet high, forced the vessel into a hogging position where the bow and stern ride waves while the midsection sags unsupported. If the strain was great enough, the steel could have fractured. Others argue the ship may have already taken on water, weakening her internal structure before a final plunge. As the drone passed along the edges of the torn hull, the evidence of immense pressure was unmistakable. Beams were bent in unnatural angles, rivets sheared off clean, and entire plates curled outward as though peeled back by an invisible hand. Each detail reinforced the violent nature of the wreck, a chilling reminder that this was not a slow sinking, but a sudden, catastrophic failure. For many, the images also emphasized the human dimension of the tragedy. The break in the hull meant that when the Fitzgerald went down, it did so in a matter of moments. There was no time for lifeboats to be launched, no opportunity for distress flares, and no chance of survival for the 29 aboard. It's unfortunate, but the wreck's condition silently testifies to why no bodies were ever recovered. Because the sea claimed everything at once, yet even in its silence, the wreck is not without danger. For those who attempt to study it, the very steel that entombed the crew now threatens the machines sent to bear witness. Unseen hazards and entanglements. Surveying a wreck as large and complex as the Edmund Fitzgerald is not without risk, even for a modern underwater drone. The twisted metal of the ship lies in a state of collapse, with beams, cables, and jagged plates protruding in every direction. For the operators at the surface, guiding the drone through this maze required precision, patience, and constant awareness of unseen hazards. One of the greatest dangers came from loose rigging and wires. Over decades, currents have shifted debris around the site, leaving nets of steel cable draped across the wreck. For a drone, these act like invisible traps. A single propeller caught in a cable could spell the end of the mission, leaving the vehicle stranded half a kilometer below the surface. At such depths, recovery would be nearly impossible. Another hazard lay in the ship's collapsed structures. The stern, in particular, has folded in on itself, creating cavities and overhangs where silt clouds and darkness conceal sharp edges. When the drone ventured too close, even a small bump could tear into delicate wiring or fracture a camera lens. To reduce the risk, operators limited penetration into enclosed spaces, preferring to survey from just beyond the perimeter. The environment of Lake Superior itself added to the challenge. Near the bottom, fine sediments rest in a fragile balance. The drone's thrusters, if angled too sharply, could stir the lake bed into a blinding storm of particles. Once stirred, this silt takes minutes to settle, obscuring cameras and sonar alike. A single wrong movement could render the wreck invisible until the water cleared. Navigation was also complicated by magnetic interference. The Fitzgerald's steel hull creates localized disturbances that disrupt compass readings. Without accurate orientation, the drone's pilot had to rely on sonar and visual reference points, hatch covers, deck machinery, or sections of railing to stay on course. Yet, despite these dangers, the mission pressed on. Each hazard, while real, stressed the difficulty of working in an environment where failure meant permanent loss. On the topic of loss, ever wondered if the drone came across any human presence? Personal effects and human presence. The truth is, among all the features of the Edmund Fitzgerald's wreck, none carry more weight than the small human details left behind. The twisted steel of the hull and the scattered cargo might speak of mechanics and physics, but it's the remnants of daily life that remind us the ship wasn't only an industrial machine, but also home to 29 men who never returned. As the drone maneuvered carefully around the wreck, its cameras recorded objects scattered across the lakebed. A shoe half buried in silt, fragments of clothing caught on jagged edges, and the outlines of furniture from crew quarters. They look like items placed for display in a museum, but they aren't. All of the items were personal belongings, still in the exact moment of loss, preserved by the cold depths for half a century. One of the most striking discoveries was in the stern section, where collapsed steel has partially shielded parts of the crew's living spaces. Within this area, the drone's lights revealed a mess of bunks, twisted lockers, and even cookware strewn across the floor. In some cases, items are almost unrecognizable, softened by years of silt and corrosion. Even without recovered remains, these objects are quiet witnesses to the lives lost. They remind us that the Fitzgerald story is not just about how a ship sank, but about who was aboard when it did. The presence of personal effects also raises ethical questions. How closely should we look? And most importantly, how much should be shown? Since the '95 joint US-Canadian agreement to protect the site, explorers have been urged to treat it as a grave site, not a curiosity. Still, myths and lasting questions linger. Warnings, myths, and lasting questions. Nearly 50 years after the ship disappeared into Lake Superior, her story remains unsettled. The wreck has been studied by sonar, photographed by submersibles, and most recently revisited by high-definition underwater drones, yet it continues to speak in fragments. What we know is powerful, but what we do not know may be even more telling. Theories about the sinking have circulated since the storm, with some investigators pointing to structural failure under the strain of rogue waves, giant, unexpected walls of water that may have forced the vessel into impossible stresses. Others suggest the ship may have been overloaded, or that improperly secured hatches allowed water to flood the holds. A few even question whether charts of the lake's shoals were accurate, raising the possibility that the Fitzgerald struck bottom before breaking apart. This is where the wreck's warning emerges most clearly. On a practical level, it forced changes to shipping safety, stricter regulations on cargo loads, better weather forecasting, and more reliable communication standards. These improvements, although written in the shadow of tragedy, were a way of ensuring that the loss of the Fitzgerald would not be repeated. Yet the warning is not only technical, it is also human. The ship's twisted steel, scattered cargo, and personal effects remind us of the limits of human control. The Fitzgerald was among the most advanced ships of her time, yet in the face of Superior's November storms, she was fragile. The lake's silence now tells us what the investigation's reports could not, that even the strongest engineering must bow to the forces of nature. What do you think sank the ship? Tell us in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this.